The most important thing for me to do right now is to talk about the greatest red pill that I swallowed in the year 2005. I recently saw a documentary video called The End of Suburbia, and it opened my eyes to the fact that our way of life is only possible because of the relatively low cost of electricity. In the program, it was highlighted how conventional oil and natural gas production around the world had reached their peak levels and were about to begin a downward trend. I was a part of the peak oil movement back in those days, and I remember thinking that everyone would have to get used to a far lower level of living. I went to meetings, authored a book that I never published, and traveled the world in order to get a better understanding of how previous civilizations dealt with the challenge of having less energy available in their society than we do. One of the individuals that arrived late to the peak oil party was by the name Chris Martenson, and his YouTube channel, Peak Prosperity, became extremely popular during COVID, mainly due to the fact that he started sounding the alarm about COVID as early as January of 2020, well before the majority of people noticed what was going on. Back in 2009, when he released a series called The Crash Course, he was also sounding the alarm about the impending peak in oil production. When I first saw The End of Suburbia in 2005, you would have assumed that I would alter my way of life in preparation for a future in which there is minimal to no consumption of energy. Instead, I did the opposite. I increased the amount of energy that I consumed. This is because in the 15 minutes before a bar shuts at 1 in the morning, customers rush in to acquire the final drinks, often ordering 2 or 3 at once. As a result, I went on a number of road excursions to destinations such as New York City, Chicago, Las Vegas, and Los Angeles. I went to Australia, Egypt, Europe, and the South Pacific because I was afraid that at any time people might figure out what I knew, push up the price of energy to the moon, and then make it so expensive that it would be impossible to travel. I thought I was correct when the price of a barrel of oil reached $150 in 2008, but then there was one final spike in 2008 as the oil price exploded and then crashed. When the oil and gas boom occurred, everyone went back to sleep for the next 10 to 15 years, and I thought that this would be the end of it. What do you think is going to happen when a country and a culture that has been built around the automobile stops producing any oil? One of the reasons why the concept of peak oil had such an impact on me when I first learned about it in 2005 was because I had traveled to 2 countries that had artificially induced peak oil production in the 1990s. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Yugoslavia was left with only 15% of its oil supply, but sanctions from Cuba had already eliminated around half of the country's oil reserves. I'm going to have to dig up some of my old information at some time, which will thereafter become useful once more and be distributed to everyone. The majority of people will be living in denial, and those who come to terms with the reality will either speed up their use of the Earth's remaining fossil fuels because they recognize they won't have access to them for much longer, or they will begin to make preparations. However, the vast majority of people will just burn it and not prepare it. This also has a significant impact on women. The good news is that feminism is dead, and the bad news is that lane whales will be forced to reduce their size. There will be a whole generation of young women who have excessive amounts of skin hanging off their bodies. Women won't be able to go to college, and they'll have to start families in their early 20s because we won't have as much prenatal care, and there won't be as much surplus energy to shuttle kids around to daycare. The impacts on women include things like the fact that they'll look like they're wearing wingsuits. The impacts on women also include the fact that they'll appear to be wearing wingsuits. Alternatively, mothers will have to take care of their children once more while fathers get back to work constructing and sustaining the physical world. Therefore, they will not benefit from attending college. Responsibilities related to childbearing in their early 20s, in addition to the absence of any kind of carousel writing. Ironically, it was a woman who wrote those articles about what would happen to women in the late 2000s as a result of peak oil. The articles predicted that unhappy women would reduce their consumption because they were forced to buy the 90 Clown World show. Energy shortages can have a negative impact, especially on women's finances. Back when I was involved in the peak oil movement, we used to have conversations about how our whole consumption would need to be cut by 90% as a society. I had already gotten into the habit of living on a budget back then. On the other hand, I reasoned to myself that the majority of people are not going to be able to cut their consumption by 90% in order to bring down their carbon emissions and stop global warming from getting out of control. If you believe in such a thing in the same manner that I did back then, it also makes me think that people in the past were really self-centered and they didn't care about bringing more kids into a low-energy future. This is something that I did not realize when I was younger. They decided to have children so that they could pass on the chores around the farm to their offspring rather than doing them themselves. Due to their lack of experience, children take pleasure in performing unpleasant tasks, such as shoveling dung or digging trenches. Nowadays, people are self-centered and prefer to spend more time enjoying their life without having children because there is no manure to shovel, with the possible exception of politics. There are no afflictions of the body for us to suffer through that we may hand down to our descendants. The joy we got out of being parents in the past despite the struggles we had to go through at the time, is greater than the pain we went through back then. People like huge families, which is something I really hope won't become commonplace as time goes on and we go into the future. Because when our resources become more limited, the last thing we'll want is a smaller population to contend with at the same time. Because we would have fewer resources, we will be able to maintain a lifestyle that is similar for longer. I am likewise of the opinion that folks concerned about global warming are insane. The Earth has a mechanism that it uses to combat the effects of having an excessive amount of carbon in its atmosphere. The oceans become more acidic, which causes 80–90% of the life that once existed in them to perish. Once dead, this life sinks to the ocean floor where it is finally suffocated. It's called an ocean and harmful events. The weather is stormier than usual and objects get carried into the oceans from land, where they also get trapped as carbon. This is why it's called an ocean. When sufficient carbon is sequestered, the oceans will gradually become less acidic, and everything will return to its previous state. The Earth does not perish, rather it only adjusts to new conditions. However, the oil age might be coming to an end a lot sooner than any of us now anticipate. To be more exact, when it no longer makes economic sense to extract all of the oil, gas, and coal that is buried deep inside the Earth. Because in many instances, the amount of energy required to extract it will be greater than the amount of energy extracted from it. When that happens, the oil age will be over, with the possible exception of a military using hydroelectric power generated from renewable sources in the middle of the night to drill for oil or dig for oil. Due to the fact that it requires fuels for tanks and planes, both of which are essential for natural defense. I think they will probably experience an economic collapse because of the high cost of oil, and after that, because everyone will be poor, the price of oil will drop, which will cause the economy to grow. Once more, until everything becomes unreasonably expensive and the cycle repeats itself. There will be a continual boom followed by a slump. Therefore, why aren't people like Bill Gates and others talking about this at the World Economic Forum? Of course, they are aware that this is going to happen. What do you suppose the motivation is behind Bill Gates' purchase of so much farmland? He is aware that the world of the future will have less energy. As a result, he is purchasing tracts of land that have the potential to generate power for future generations. As we go back to some form of feudalism, but individuals like him expect that people will go along with it cheerfully and become serfs after having been free for a very long period. However, I do not believe that he will be able to continue to live the lifestyle he currently leads. If others are unable to take use of it as well, I witnessed the advent of gasoline gangsters in Yugoslavia. These were individuals who illegally imported fuel from other countries in order to sell it on the black market. People will engage in bartering for gasoline, which will result in it acquiring a new value or currency. Put gold, cash, and cryptocurrency out of your mind. Since these forms of energy translate directly into economic activity, oil, coal, and natural gas are the most valuable forms of storage since they can be used to create wealth. In spite of the fact that agriculture is responsible for the collection of solar energy and the subsequent production of food and fuel, Gates will not be able to prevent people from stealing his corn from such wide stretches of land and using it for themselves in the event that this occurs. It is impossible to create a nation-state, and if we did, we would have to go back to feudalism. Yet it is impossible for one lord or king to control the majority of the farmland. Because of the peasants' ability to create goods and the fact that the system was relatively decentralized, feudalism was successful across an entire continent. The fact that we are living at the end of the oil age, which will last approximately 150 to 200 years, is one conceivable future that we need to accept. Gates undoubtedly wants the future to look more like Pan Am from the Hunger Games. It's a good idea to relocate to rural areas and settle in small towns where you can be close to working farms that are only a mile or two away from the center of town. It would not be a good idea to live in Phoenix or Las Vegas, particularly in light of the fact that the water level in Lake Mead is continuing to fall because of all the high-quality hydroelectric electricity that is generated in the Northeast and the Northwest by the inland rivers. These regions will be the finest places to live in the future. In the past, when the Mississippi was more prone to flooding, it would have been an ideal location to both live and work on agricultural estates during the warm summer months. And after that, spending the winter months in a warm climate, such as New Orleans, would be ideal. When I first learned about peak oil, I also went down there to see how people farmed, and it was fascinating. I discovered that the huge Mississippi River fertilized the fields each year when it flooded before to the real construction of the levees in a manner that was quite similar to how the Nile River fertilized the crops in Egypt. Because of this, I believe that in order for the Egyptians to have food in the future, they will have to break down the big dam at Aswan and allow the Nile to flood once more. When I was closer to the middle of the political spectrum on the left, it was largely those on the left who had the foolish idea that the world was prepared to deal with this information. In order to divert their attention away from the most lethal red pill in the world, the elites will have to fabricate a story. Keep in mind that all of the plastics in your life, including your synthetic clothes, plastic toothbrushes, and everything else, derive from oil that was used to cook meals. To retrieve 1 calorie of energy from food out of the earth, one must first extract 10 calories worth of energy from fossil fuels. When I went to Buffalo City Hall, but it was built in the 1920s and 30s before industrial oil-based agriculture, the politicians sat on little chairs since the typical guy was approximately 5'5" or 5'6" and quite stupid. The building was constructed in the 1920s and 30s. At least the obesity pandemic is on the verge of being solved on its own very soon. Everyone who used to be overweight will now be starving to death and will see their teeth fall out. On the plus side, it will most likely result in the creation of some outstanding skeletal bullshit. The end of low-cost and inexpensive oil for the majority of people will also bring an increase in energy theft. If prices are kept artificially low, gasoline will become as addictive as crack cocaine. You will observe a reversal in the wealth effect as the prices of homes in the suburbs fall. Anywhere that is not scaled for a future with low energy consumption is going to be in trouble. Therefore, my prognosis is that people will begin moving from large cities to smaller communities in order to escape the depression. It's likely that the value of real estate, as well as small towns and the agricultural fields around them, will continue to rise. The finest chances lie outside of condominiums, in my opinion. This is why the video was made. Back in 2005, the end of suburbia had such a significant impact on me that it terrified the living daylights out of me. Literally. Shale oil postponed what was inevitably going to happen. And now battery storage and solar panels might be able to do the same for a little while. However, this is a straightforward problem to solve, and the elites are sufficiently alarmed by it that they want us to eat bugs, sleep in pods, and take cold showers. Additionally, they are free to continue cruising the skies in their private jets while chowing down on steak. Chris Martenson does an excellent job of demonstrating how the availability of fossil fuel energy in our society is closely correlated to the state of the economy. If your energy doesn't grow, your economy doesn't flourish. If you utilize less energy, it will have a negative effect on your economy. Bitcoin, in a twist of irony, is a deflationary asset and therefore an ideal currency for a world like that. Chris discusses a report titled The Inevitable Downfall of Russia's Oil Industry, and he is of the opinion that if the West weans itself off of Russian oil, it would most likely result in a price increase of $300 per barrel. Try to picture what would happen to the global economy if the price of oil was 3 times higher than it is right now. In addition to this, he is upbeat about the prospect that, in the not-too-distant future, in the shape of thorium reactors, we may be able to replace 70–80% of the energy that we currently get from fossil fuels with energy derived from thorium. It was stated by him that the deserts of Nevada in the 1950s contained enough thorium to last 1,000 years. The United States and China are both currently in the process of developing their own prototype nuclear reactors. However, the decision to use uranium reactors rather than plutonium reactors was taken for this reason. These reactors produce enriched uranium, which is an excellent source of nuclear material for use in atomic bombs. Although it is possible to construct bombs utilizing thorium, we do not yet employ the necessary technology to do so. However, he had a conversation with someone who is attempting to get the initiative off the ground using private funding. In 2004 and 2005, the number of people looking for peak oil was 5 to 10 times higher than it was when MGTOW was at its pinnacle. However, we currently produce fertilizer by extracting hydrogen from fossil fuels and burning natural gas. In the future, we hope to have an alternative to these methods. I believe that the market cycle is coming to an end, similar to what we witnessed in 2008 when it went up to $150 a barrel, which is another factor that is contributing to the surge in oil prices. It appears that I may have been 20 or 30 years too early for peak oil, and furthermore, I don't really need to worry about it as much in Canada because of all the natural resources we have. Regardless, we're facing a deflationary future in which we'll need to re-ruralize, and we'll need a deflationary currency for a change, because inflationary currencies only work while the economy is growing.